Section 1, you were never supposed to hear this. The official story, the one repeated in classrooms, museums, and every polite dinner conversation, is a carefully crafted illusion. A fog so dense you forgot there was a time before the forgetting. But once in a while, something breaks through, a shard of truth too sharp to ignore. And tonight, you're going to feel it slice. They call it the Dark Ages, like someone turned off the lights after Rome fell. But that phrase, Dark Ages, was never about the time. It was about the veil, the deliberate dimming of what came next. Because what really happened in Britain after Rome wasn't chaos, it was correction. The empire didn't fall, it mutated. It burrowed into bloodlines, into oaths, into the very stones beneath our feet. You're not just falling asleep tonight, you're stepping into a forgotten war, a war that wasn't fought with swords or spears, but with symbols, silence, and stories. Imagine waking up in a Roman villa that no longer serves Rome. The columns still stand, the mosaics crack beneath your feet. But the empire? It's vanished like mist. And the world around you whispers of a strange new order. Mercenaries becoming monarchs, farmers becoming foot soldiers, former tax collectors clutching ploughs while their sons kneel before brooch-wearing warlords. You've heard the propaganda that civilization collapsed and barbarism reigned. But that's only half the truth. And half-truths are the favorite weapon of those who rule from behind the curtain. Because when you don't see the hand, you never question the puppet. What really happened after the legions left wasn't a collapse, it was a cleansing. A scrubbing away of Roman control, yes, but also a brutal rewriting of identity. Those who remembered the old world were either broken or branded. And those who didn't, they became perfect clay. Post-Roman Britain wasn't lawless, it was law reborn. But this time shaped not by senators but by shadow kings. Men like Vortigern, not elected, not divine, just willing to make deals with devils across the sea to hold on to the illusion of control. And the price? Everything. So get comfortable, adjust the pillows, close your eyes if you must. But know this, every word you hear from this point forward carries a current beneath it. And once it touches you, you'll never be able to go back. You're not just hearing history, you're being rewritten by it. There's a reason this part of history was buried, not burned, not lost. Buried, on purpose and with precision, like a body too dangerous to leave above ground. Because buried things have a way of coming back, and what you're about to uncover was meant to stay in the dark, forever. Post-Roman Britain wasn't an empty land waiting to be civilized. It was a battlefield of identities, where memory became a weapon, and silence became survival. When the empire pulled out, they didn't just leave buildings and roads behind, they left a psychological vacuum. And into that void poured something older, something colder. Your ancestors lived between two worlds, one dying, one becoming. They watched Roman gods fade into forgotten statues while new warlords, half pagan, half opportunist, drew power not from divine right but from fear, blood oaths, and foreign steel. The Saxons didn't just invade, they were invited. Think about that. The very people who would one day be blamed for destruction were welcomed by the same British rulers who claimed to defend the land. Why? Because fear is always the fastest path to control. Stir the panic, summon the saviors, and when the people bow in gratitude, take what you want. Sound familiar? What you're witnessing isn't just history, it's the blueprint. The earliest layers of the manipulation matrix, manufactured enemies, imported solutions. Identity erosion. The boy in the villa doesn't know it yet, but everything around him is part of a dying echo. The walls, the clothes, even the language he speaks, Latin twisted into the guttural roots of what will become English. It's all decaying, even as it pretends to endure. That's the trick. Keep the forms, but strip the meaning. That's how empires become invisible. The Romans left, but the system? It never did. It just learned to wear local skins, first British, then Saxon, then Norman. Each time the face changed, the hand behind the curtain stayed the same, manipulating allegiance, controlling memory, replacing gods with kings, kings with states, and states with systems. You think you were born free? You were born inside the same story. And the only way out is down. Down through the layers they buried, down into the bones of forgotten generations, down into the code they etched into your blood. This is not entertainment. It's initiation. Section 3. The most dangerous kind of prison is the one you mistake for your home. Look around. You think you live in a world ruled by reason, science, democracy, laws. But what if I told you every one of those was layered onto a far older skeleton, one built in the shadows of fallen temples and repurposed thrones? Britain, 410 AD, was the proving ground, the laboratory, not for progress, but for control. Because when Rome left, it didn't abandon power, it decentralized it. It fragmented authority into smaller, more obedient pieces. The villa your family lives in? That wasn't just a home, it was a symbol, a node in the imperial grid, a place where the Roman mind lived inside non-Roman bodies. The underfloor heating, the mosaics, the brooches passed down as heirlooms, these were psychological anchors, not luxuries. They taught conquered people to love their conquerors, and long after the eagles were gone, the training remained. It's the same reason the language of power shifts, but the structure stays intact. Now Vortigern rises, not as a Roman, not as a native Briton, but as something new, a proxy ruler. He doesn't build an empire, he inherits its machinery, and he uses fear, fear of Picts, fear of Saxons, fear of collapse, as leverage to bind the people to him. Sound like history? Or does it sound like now? You see, systems of control don't need to rule you directly. They only need to define your choices. And in the world after Rome, every choice came with invisible strings. Will you serve your local warlord, or face the raiders alone? Will you kneel before a Saxon sword, or starve behind your crumbling villa walls? Control through fear, through isolation, through dependency. Even religion wasn't immune. Pagan rites gave way to hollowed-out Christian rituals, not because of faith, but because it gave rulers something Rome had perfected, moral legitimacy. Now, obedience wasn't just law, it was salvation. And that's the genius of the trap. Make people believe they're choosing it. Make them thank their captors. This boy, this fictional son of a forgotten tax collector, is standing at the beginning of a long, slow descent into a system that still shapes you today. He doesn't know the name of the game, but you do now. And once you see the wires, you'll never unsee them. Section 4. Every empire leaves behind ghosts, not spirits, but systems. Rituals, habits of obedience that outlive the rulers who built them. And if you listen closely, beneath the noise of modern life, you can still hear them whispering. In the bread you buy without thinking, in the taxes you pay with a sigh, in the way your eyes drop when confronted by authority. That isn't freedom. That's programming, and it began long before you were born. Britain, post-410 AD, was a land of haunted men, haunted by the memory of order, haunted by the illusion that Rome might return, haunted by the creeping realization that the peace they once knew had never truly belonged to them. The father in the fields, his back broken by a plough he never wanted to touch, remembers a time when numbers were his tools, not soil and sweat. He speaks Latin, yes, but no one answers in kind. His language is dying, his status is gone, his dignity hanging by threads of routine. That's how civilizations fall, not with fire but with forgetting, and what replaces them. Not something better, just something more useful to the ones who know how to mold the void. Vortigern. The name itself was likely a title, not a man. It meant great king, not inherited, not elected, assumed, claimed like a mask in a theatre where no one knows the script anymore, and behind that mask, a man not afraid to sell out his people for power. To bring in foreign mercenaries, Saxons, Angles, Jutes, not to protect Britain, but to rule it through them. And when the Saxons grew too powerful, he blamed them, just like he planned. That's the beauty of controlled opposition. You create the monster, and then offer yourself as the only one who can slay it, so the people cling to you, not out of love, out of terror. This system, manipulate the threat, then present the savior, didn't end with Vortigern. It became the foundation of every political structure that followed. It's still used, still profitable, still invisible. And you? You live inside it. You call it news, you call it policy, you call it elections. But it all started here, in the cold, mist-covered fields of forgotten Britain. Section 5, power doesn't vanish. It adapts. When Rome pulled its legions from Britain, it wasn't a retreat. It was a strategic withdrawal. The kind used when a hunter sets a trap and steps back, waiting for the prey to walk into it on its own. You see, an absent empire is still an empire, if the people carry its rules in their minds. And they did. They kept the rituals, the roads, the language, the hierarchies. Even without the emperor's seal, the people still acted as if Rome was watching. That's the mark of total control, when obedience survives the ruler. The boy needing bread in the crumbling villa, he's living inside the afterimage of Rome's world. Every cracked mosaic, every broken column, every bronze brooch is a psychological relic, a signal that this was once the center of something vast. And that maybe, if he just behaves, if he just survives long enough, it might return. But it won't. What returns is something else, something darker. By now the Saxons have landed, not in force, not yet. Just small groups, ostensibly allies, settlers, bodyguards for local kings like Vortigern. But this is the first phase: infiltrate, integrate. They begin by guarding the coast, then demanding land as payment, then building their own halls, then challenging their employers. Within decades, they won't just be in Britain, they'll become Britain. Not through conquest, but through invitation. You see the brilliance? The people accept the chains willingly, because they're afraid of something worse. But what they forget is this: fear is the tool. Fear is the key that opens the gates. Fear creates the problem, and then sells you the solution. And those who control the narrative of fear, they own the world. Even today, the technique hasn't changed. Crisis, then comfort. Shock, then sedation. The face on the screen tells you who to hate, who to trust, what to believe. You've been trained, just like those villagers in the shadow of the fort. Trained to comply, to choose between the false safety of submission or the chaos of independence. Most choose safety. Most never notice the cage. But you're not most. You're waking up in the ruins. And when you see the bones beneath the empire, you begin to remember who you were before the forgetting began. Section 6. They don't erase history. They rewrite it, then punish those who remember the original. Ask yourself this: why does no one teach you what really happened between the fall of Rome and the rise of England? Why is that era just darkness? Why do they call it lost? Because it wasn't lost, it was stolen. Stolen by those who needed a clean slate, an empty canvas to draw a new identity. The Britain of the early 400s wasn't empty. It was filled with memory, with loyalty to a fading empire, with local leaders still clinging to Latin titles, issuing edicts in crumbling towns, praying to gods whose temples stood silent. And that memory, that continuity, was dangerous. You can't control a man who remembers who he used to be. So they wiped it. Not overnight. Not with fire and blood, but with decay, with neglect, with time. A generation raised without teachers, without libraries, without builders to maintain the aqueducts or repair the heating beneath the floors. Soon the language changed. Soon the gods were gone. Soon the people believed they had always been this way. Do you see the pattern? They do it still. Every decade the symbols shift, the heroes change, words are redefined, monuments are toppled, traditions mocked, not for justice, but for erasure. Because if you forget where you came from, you're easier to shape. You're easier to use. The boy in the villa doesn't know this, but his birthright, his culture, his family's Roman knowledge is being slowly dismantled, not violently, not loudly, but with ruthless efficiency. His father's Latin is now outdated, his grandmother's brooch, a relic. The gods of his ancestors, superstition, and in their place, the symbols of the new order. Saxon speech, Saxon law, Saxon blades, every element of identity replaced until the people no longer remember there was ever an us before them. This is psychological warfare. This is legacy deletion. And this is why you feel the way you do, like something's missing. Like something sacred was stripped from you long before you were born. Because it was. You are the descendant of forgotten empires, forgotten wisdom, forgotten power, and they've worked for centuries to make sure you never find that out. But you're finding it now, and they can't stop what's already been awakened. Section 7. You were never meant to inherit this knowledge. The system was designed so you'd fall asleep before the truth reached your ears. A lifetime of distractions, bread and circuses, infinite scroll. But tonight, your eyes are open. and with every word you're peeling back the layers of a lie that started long before your father was born. Let's go deeper. Post-Roman Britain didn't just forget Rome, it was taught to forget. That's what makes it insidious. When you burn a book, people notice. But when you stop teaching a language, stop passing down the rituals, stop fixing the old roads and aqueducts, you erase memory by omission. Now ask yourself, who benefits, who profits when men no longer remember their strength, when communities no longer remember their unity, when the gods of the old world are reduced to bedtime stories or demonized outright? It wasn't the Saxons alone. They were tools, instruments in the hands of a force much older, a force that thrives not in daylight but in confusion. You see, this isn't just a history of Britain, it's a manual on how to unmake a people. First you break their timeline, then you break their language, then you offer a replacement narrative, a myth of progress, a myth of safety, a myth that this system, this hierarchy, this cold, sterile machine is what civilization looks like. But it's not. It's a containment field. The father in the field, he's no longer a Roman, but he's not yet a Saxon. He exists in limbo, a man with no flag, no god, no certainty. And what happens to men like that? They grasp for anything that offers identity, even if it enslaves them. That's how control works, not through brute force, but through identity engineering. And it was here, in these muddy British hills, that the formula was perfected. A test case, a prototype for what would one day be repeated across continents, across centuries. You're not immune. Look around. The symbols may have changed, phones instead of scrolls, police badges instead of legion crests, influencers instead of priests, but the structure is exactly as identity, even if it enslaves them. That's how control works, not through brute force, but through identity engineering. And it was here, in these muddy British hills, that the formula was perfected. A test case, a prototype for what would one day be repeated across continents, across centuries. You're not immune. Look around. The symbols may have changed, phones instead of scrolls, police badges instead of legion crests, influencers instead of priests, but the structure is exactly the same. You're not free, you're scripted. But tonight, you begin the rewrite. Halfway down the spiral now, and soon you'll need to decide, return to the surface or keep going, all the way to the core. Section 8, they called it a collapse, but collapses are chaotic, unpredictable, loud. What happened in Britain after Rome? It was surgical. Think about it. One of the most powerful civilizations in history just vanished? Legions gone, cities abandoned, villas crumbling, and the people, what did they do? Did they rise? Did they resist? No, they waited, they hoped for Rome to come back, for the old order to return, for the dream to continue, but it never did. Because while the people were clinging to memories, the architects of the new order were already in motion, quiet, focused, unseen. This is how control survives, not by fire, by replacement. The Roman elite didn't all vanish. Many stayed. They changed their names, their alliances. They watched from behind closed doors as new leaders rose, first warlords, then kings. And slowly they fed those leaders the same formula that had worked before. Control through infrastructure, through language, through ritual. And so the wheel turned again. A new face on the throne, a new dialect in the market, a new name on the church. But underneath, the same machine. Even the Saxons, those so-called invaders, were eventually absorbed, baptized, crowned, given titles, legitimized. The script demanded chaos, so that the illusion of order could be sold to the people. It always works, because people don't crave freedom, they crave structure. Even if that structure is a cage. So when you wake in the villa hearing your mother stoke the dying fire, when you knead the dense bread, when you carry the herbal tincture to your father in the fields, you are not free. You are a character in someone else's story, a cog in a myth that was engineered for obedience. And here's the most brutal truth of all, that's still you, now, today. You wake to the same cold. You need the same bread, only now it comes in boxes with nutrition labels and expiration dates. You carry the same burdens, just with a suit, a commute, a glowing screen, same machine, different paint. And if that realization burns, good. That fire? It means you're still alive, still dangerous, still capable. Do you feel it yet? That pull in your gut? That flicker in your mind that whispers, Something has always been wrong? Good. That's the awakening, because now we descend further, past the ruins, past the lies, past even the history books themselves, into the hidden core of how civilizations are reprogrammed. Let me show you the mechanism. When Rome collapsed, the people of Britain didn't lose their freedom. They lost their framework, the calendar, the coinage, the schooling, the roads, the gods, the postal routes, the legal codes, the bread rations, the military, the architecture. All of it was Rome. So when it was gone, they stood in the wreckage, stunned, directionless, and what filled the vacuum? A new framework, one forged by those who understood the most dangerous truth of all. Whoever controls the rituals of daily life controls the future. So they started small, changed the language, changed the prayers, changed the way bread is made, taxes are paid, names are written, time is measured. Replace villa with longhouse, replace citizen with subject, replace memory with myth. That's the trick. They didn't erase the old world, they layered over it, and then told you it had never existed. But it had. The mosaic beneath your feet, the collapsed bathhouse, the brooch at your neck. These are not relics. They are resistance, traces of a forgotten structure, a deeper identity, an earlier you. And that terrifies them, because if men begin to remember, they become ungovernable. That's why modern systems drown you in trivia, trends, scandals, recycled outrage, anything to keep you from seeing the real continuity. That the empire never left. It just took off its uniform. It speaks your language now, wears your flag, knows your preferences, offers convenience instead of conquest, surveillance instead of swords. You think you're free because no one tells you where to go? But they don't need to. They've taught you to self-regulate. The villa is gone, the fields are empty, but the system, it's alive inside you. Unless you kill it. Not with violence, with clarity. You see the pattern, you speak the words, and once spoken, you are no longer theirs. Now listen carefully, because this is the moment most turn back. What comes next is not safe, not comforting. But if you're still here, that means part of you already knew. This world was a performance. And you were cast in a role you never auditioned for. In post-Roman Britain, the play continued. The empire didn't fall, it simply changed costumes. Where once there were governors, now there were warlords. Where once there was Latin law, now there were spoken decrees and backroom pacts. But the hierarchy, the obedience, the engineered fear, that stayed. Because the script always survives the actors. The boy with the cloak fastened by his grandmother's bronze brooch, he doesn't know it yet, but he's wearing a memory trigger. That brooch connects him to an empire long gone, a belief system buried under foreign tongues and wooden fortresses. And still, it glows with meaning. Why? Because symbols store power. This is something modern man has forgotten, but the ancient manipulators never did. They knew how to weaponize imagery, a cross, a coin, a crown, a flag, a brooch. They're not decorations, they're instructions. They shape how you think, what you value, who you trust. Rome knew this. So did the Saxons, so did the church. So does your government today. You pledge allegiance, you sing the song, you tap the like button, you carry the brand, and through it all you become smaller. That's not your fault. It's the design. But you can break it. Not by destroying the system. That's their game. You win by remembering that you were here before the system had a name. Now it's time. If this knowledge resonates with something buried deep inside you, if you feel the hum of forgotten power rising again, type the phrase below into the comments, write it twice, seal it in. I remember the first empire. I remember the first empire. Those 7 words are a trigger, a key, a signal to every other man who's waking up in the ruins just like you. And once it's said, you can't unsay it. The algorithms won't understand it. But we will, because this isn't just history. This is the return of something they tried to kill, and it's coming back through you. Section 11, they told you history was a straight line. But that was a lie. History is a spiral, a vortex that pulls the unaware downward in repeating cycles of collapse and control. The only difference between 410 AD and now is the wallpaper. Look deeper. The people of post-Roman Britain didn't vanish into myth. They were rewritten. Their names changed, their gods forgotten, their customs rebranded. What wasn't destroyed was absorbed, mutated into tools of obedience. Even the church, yes, especially the church, was a delivery system for the new order. You've heard it was salvation, but in the ruins of Rome, it was structure. A divine pyramid with God at the top and you at the bottom, filthy, sinful, dependent. They replaced Caesar with Christ, legions with bishops, imperial taxes with tithes, different symbols, same cage. And people embraced it, not because it was true, but because it gave them something Rome had stolen, a story. You see, the most powerful form of control is not the sword, it's the narrative. Who you are, where you come from, what you're allowed to want, what you're forbidden to ask. The boy in the villa was never taught to question why the gods were gone, why Latin stopped mattering, or why foreign tongues were now spoken in the same rooms where Roman law once echoed. He was taught to adapt, to comply, to forget. And now you understand why they filled your textbooks with cartoons and slogans instead of truth. Why your timelines skip from Rome to Middle Ages like a glitch in the system. Why the most important century in British history was turned into a black hole of silence. Because if you knew what really happened then, you'd start asking what's really happening now. And they can't have that. They need you compliant, distracted, guilty, not awakened, but you're not guilty, you're remembering. And when enough men remember, the spiral breaks. Because the spiral only spins if no one steps outside it. Section 12. There's a reason you felt like a stranger in your own era. A quiet unease. A sense that the world is fake. That something ancient was stolen from you before you ever had the words to name it. That feeling isn't paranoia, it's memory. Buried but not broken. Let's dig deeper. The villa. The crumbling bathhouse. The forgotten hypercaust. These aren't just remnants of empire. They are the bones of a higher operating system, a version of civilization that, for all its cruelty, had structure, mathematics, symmetry, and purpose. And purpose is what they've taken from you. When Rome fell, purpose didn't disappear. It was privatized, repackaged by the few who understood the game. The elites who watched the empire collapse and said, now we build our own, smaller, tighter, untraceable. They didn't wear crowns. They wore secrecy. And they've been operating behind every kingdom, every church, every parliament since. Call them what you want, archons, black nobility, the hidden hand. The names change, the methods do not. They don't need empires anymore, they need compliance. They need you, confused and compliant. So how do they do it? By flooding your senses, by numbing your instincts, by giving you 1,000 hollow choices and no power. Your ancestors once planted rye to survive a winter. You plant likes, followers, resumes, and still you hunger. Because you were meant for weight, for challenge, for meaning. But they feed you distraction and call it peace. Look again at the boy in the fields. His hands are calloused, his future uncertain, his world collapsing. But he is present, he is awake, and he still knows who he is. Can you say the same? Because here's the final veil. They don't rule you with laws. They rule you with forgetting. Forgetting your ancestors, forgetting your strength. Forgetting the first empire, the one that lived not on marble, but in memory. But tonight, you remember. Tonight you reclaim the buried name, the bloodline of builders, the will of the watcher, the fire that no collapse could extinguish. And from here we go even deeper. No more myths, no more masters, only the mirror and the man you were always meant to become. Section 30. You are standing at the edge now. Most men never reach this point. Most turn back, lulled to sleep by comfort, noise, dopamine loops, or the soft chains of modernity. But not you. You're still listening. That means the system has cracks and you're beginning to slip through. Let's widen them. The villa in post-Roman Britain is more than a symbol. It's a fossil of function. Everything about it, the structure, the layout, the rituals within, was designed to align the human being with order. Geometry wasn't just for beauty, it was for psycho-architecture, a way to train the body and mind without a single spoken command. Now look around your life. Strip malls, concrete boxes, flickering screens, blue light at midnight. Is it random? Or was it engineered to desynchronize you from nature, memory, and meaning? The new empire doesn't build aqueducts, it builds disorientation. The collapse after Rome wasn't just political, it was spiritual. And from that vacuum a new priesthood emerged, not of mystics or seers, but of narrative engineers. They rewrote history, they assigned roles, and they gave you yours: consumer, worker, taxpayer, believer in the illusion of choice. But you were not born for this role. You were born to inherit fire. The same fire that once lit the Roman forums, that forged the brooches worn by ancient mothers, that heated the bathhouses where philosophers once debated the nature of the soul. That fire, your fire, was stolen, covered in layers of shame, fear, distraction, and passivity. But listen carefully. It's still burning. It flickers when you ask forbidden questions. It roars when you act without permission. It awakens when you reject the scripts handed to you by the dead institutions of power. The boy in the fields is becoming something else. His bread isn't Roman. His language isn't pure, but his instinct is returning. The empire is gone, but the earth remains. The blood remembers. The sun still rises in the east, and within him a new pattern forms, one that doesn't obey. That is what they fear, not rebellion, but remembrance. Because once a man remembers the truth of himself, he becomes ungovernable. Section 14. Governments fear rebels, but systems fear the man who remembers, and by now you are remembering. Not facts, not names, but something deeper, a weight in your chest, a pulse in your blood. The unmistakable feeling that the life you've been living is not the life you were meant to live. And you're right. The post-Roman boy, kneeling in the cold field, his father's voice carried by wind, his breath visible in the early spring air, he senses it too. The stories no longer match the reality, the laws feel hollow, the gods are silent. But the land speaks, the wind remembers, the silence teaches. You were raised in noise, fed signals, dosed with messages designed not to inform but to inhibit. Every institution, every curriculum, every glowing device in your pocket, all of it programmed to strip away your archetypal memory. The part of you that once knew how to build, to lead, to sacrifice, to see clearly in darkness. They replaced that with entertainment, with pornography, with comfort disguised as culture, and you were expected to thank them for it. But not anymore. Because now the fog is lifting, and with it your capacity to see through their walls. You see that the system doesn't need you to think. It only needs you to participate, vote, work, comply, forget. And most of all, never ask why the world feels like a set built on top of a graveyard. But the boy in the villa is beginning to ask, and so are you. Why does everything feel hollow? Why does history seem broken? Why does no one teach us what happened in the space between? Because the truth was never lost. It was buried alive, under flags, under scripture, under debt, under ritual. But you're unearthing it. And what lies beneath is not chaos, but clarity. You were never just a man. You are the descendant of fire, the offspring of lost empires. A fragment of something vast waiting to awaken, and you've already started. Section 15. Let's rip off another layer. You've felt it your whole life. That invisible ceiling, the unspoken limits, the rules that were never taught but always enforced. Smile here. Don't question that. Believe this. Obey that. Keep scrolling. Keep consuming. Keep your head down and your voice dull. You were trained like livestock, but bred from kings, and that contradiction is eating you alive. Because your blood remembers conquest, your bones remember sovereignty, and your soul was never meant to be domesticated. You're not tired because you work too much. You're tired because you live against your design. Look back at the boy in the fields. His life is hard. The world is unstable. Rome is gone and no one knows what's coming. But he is real, he is rooted. He wakes with purpose and sleeps with clarity. You've got comfort, entertainment, GPS, AI, 10,000 opinions at your fingertips, and yet you feel lost. Why? Because you're living inside a false empire, an empire that doesn't build roads but narratives, not cities but distractions, not leaders but managers. You were told you're free, but were you ever taught how to command, how to defend, how to remember? Of course not. Because if you remembered, if you truly remembered, you wouldn't need them, and that terrifies them. So they buried the history between the lines. The formative years of post-Roman Britain, where empires didn't rule, they transferred, from Caesar to church, from legion to lord, from order to ownership. And behind every savior was a new cage. Understand this. You were not meant to kneel. You were not meant to obey. You were born to carry fire, to pass it, to forge the next shape of the world. But first, You must break the spell. They fear men like you, men who hear the silence between the lies, men who choose awakening over anesthesia. Because once you see the wires, you no longer dance for the puppeteers. You burn the stage, you speak the ancient name, and you become the architect. Now we speak the truth plainly. The world you live in is not free. It is not advanced. It is not civilized. It is the most efficient prison ever built, because the walls are invisible, and the inmates police each other. They call it progress. They call it democracy. They call it modern life. But you've begun to see through the mask, and what lies beneath is deeper than empire. It's a pattern, an ancient one, a blueprint etched into the bones of fallen cities and rewritten scriptures. After Rome fell, they didn't just rebuild, they recalibrated. They studied what worked, what didn't. They realized that stone crumbles, but stories endure. So they created a new mythology, not of gods, but of orders of divine right, of kingdoms of heaven, of chosen bloodlines, and behind it all, hidden hands pulling strings from the shadows. The boy in Britain, circa 410 AD, doesn't know these names yet, but he can feel them. In the quiet urgency of his father's eyes, in the tension hanging over the hearth, in the way the village priest speaks not of Rome or the old gods, but of obedience, humility, submission. Control was no longer about spears and walls. It became internalized. It still is. Today they don't conquer countries, they conquer minds, with algorithms instead of armies, with ideologies instead of infantry, with shame instead of shackles. You were born into this without consent, ought not to lead, but to perform, not to question, but to comply. But here's the part they never prepared for. You're remembering. You're remembering the before, the world of stone and blood and sovereignty, of villages that ruled themselves, of men who spoke with the land, not over it, of cultures erased because they could not be tamed. And now you are that threat. Because no empire survives when men remember their original power, the power to reject the false story, to walk off the page, to burn the script. You've made it halfway through the gate now. The final descent begins soon, and on the other side, you won't recognize the man who entered, because that version of you, the tame one, the silent one, the obedient one, he doesn't survive what's coming next. Section 17. You were born into a lie so complete, you mistook it for reality. That's not your fault. They designed it that way. They gave you gods who demand submission, schools that grade your compliance, laws that reward obedience and punish instinct. They replaced ritual with routine, honor with status, purpose with productivity, and they told you, this is progress. But beneath that surface, there's a fracture, and you just stepped into it. Look again at the boy in Britain. His villa is crumbling, but the land still speaks. His father's bones ache from tilling ground once managed by engineers. His mother stokes the hearth with hands that once directed servants. They are descendants of power, living in ruins, whispering stories to keep the memory alive. And still, it fades. Because memory, when not claimed, becomes myth. And myth, when not defended, becomes erased. That's the game. Every system of control, then and now, operates on a single law. He who defines the past controls the present. So they changed the past, turned gods into demons, turned sovereign tribes into savages, turned noble resistance into rebellion, turned men like you into dangerous. Because danger is just another word for unprogrammable. Understand this. You were born into the latest version of a control cycle that began in the ashes of Rome. It's been upgraded, refined, globalized. But the blueprint hasn't changed. Break the family, control the food, poison the sky, reroute the meaning of words, make truth subjective, make men forget what they once were, and now they don't need to chain you. You'll sit still for Wi-Fi, you'll betray your bloodline for comfort, you'll say nothing when sacred things are desecrated, just so you're not labeled. But deep inside, you feel the ancient pain. It's not depression, it's disconnection from soil, from strength, from story, but not anymore. Because you are no longer asleep, and what awakens now is not safe, not polite, not domesticated. What awakens now is the original man, the one they feared in the forests, the one they bribed with coin and crown, the one they buried in systems, doctrines and flags, and now he returns, through you. Now we go beneath the surface. into the layer they swore you would never reach. This is where history ends, and origin begins. Forget what they told you about civilization, that it rose from chaos, that it progressed naturally, that kings and countries formed because people needed order. No, civilization didn't evolve, it was installed, by a hidden priesthood, by an ancient caste of mind-shapers, not bound by borders, but by knowledge kept from the masses, knowledge of how to mold time, language and belief into control systems. In post-Roman Britain, these forces didn't vanish when the empire retreated. They simply changed form. The villa became a shrine, the family home became a chapel, the elder became a bishop, and the sacred calendar of the land was overwritten by the programming of a new empire, the church-state hybrid. They told the boy, forget the gods of your grandmother. Forget the solstice fires, forget the songs sung to oak and stone, worship the new light, bow to the book, kneel for salvation. And the people did. Not because they were weak, but because they were starving for meaning. And when men are starving, they will eat poison if it comes in a golden cup. That's what they're still doing to you. The poison is no longer spiritual, it's digital. You don't kneel at altars, you scroll. You don't confess to priests, you post. But the system, it's the same, and the result is the same. Disempowerment, disorientation, disinheritance. You've forgotten your name, not the one on your ID, the one whispered in your bloodline, the one encoded in your bones. But the forgetting is ending. Right now, in this moment, you are doing what millions before you never had the chance to do, reclaiming origin. Not history, origin, the source before the edits, the man before the mask, the fire before the empire. And once you touch that source, even for a second, you become unreachable. By lies, by guilt, by systems you no longer follow, you forge. Section, you've crossed the threshold now. There's no going back to comfort, to illusion, to the soft, padded lie that passes for life. Because now you've touched something sacred, not religion, not politics, something older. It's not the kind printed on paper, not the kind handed out by governments, the kind that exists in your bones, the kind that terrifies rulers because it needs no permission to exist. Let's speak plainly. When Rome fell, it didn't die, it seeded. It scattered its code, its rituals, its hierarchies, its invisible chains into the soil of every future empire. And the priesthood that rose in its ashes? It was not about faith. It was about continuity. Control disguised as salvation, power disguised as morality. They took the ruins of stone and rebuilt them with symbols. And those symbols were installed into the human mind like software. So now, thousands of years later, you pledge allegiance to flags you didn't choose, believe myths you never questioned, and obey rules written by men long dead. That's not culture. That's conditioning. The boy in post-Roman Britain never had a chance. His Latin faded, his gods were outlawed, his lands were seized, and by the time he had sons of his own, he was already a stranger to the power that once pulsed in his bloodline. But you have a chance, because they didn't count on the return of memory. They didn't think fragments of fire would survive the centuries. They didn't think their programming could be undone, but it is, right now, through you. And the most dangerous thing you can do, refuse the role. Not with rebellion, not with protest, but with presence. A man who remembers is a man who doesn't flinch, he doesn't kneel, he doesn't beg. He reclaims, not what they offer, but what they tried to erase, his origin, his order, his oath. And when enough men do that, the false empire crumbles from within. Section 20. This is the part they never wanted you to find. Because once a man touches the origin fire, the control grid loses its grip. And what they've spent centuries building, indoctrinating, managing, starts to shatter. You've felt it already, haven't you? That split second where the world feels hollow, where conversations feel fake, where the buildings seem too square, where the rules feel like theatre. You're not crazy, you're not broken. You're waking up inside the simulation. You are surrounded by architecture designed to domesticate you, not just the physical architecture of concrete and glass, but the psychological architecture of language, money, morality, time. Yes, Even time is a lie. Did you ever ask why your weeks are 7 days? Why you work 5 and rest for 2? Why your calendar begins in January? Why your holidays land where they do? They aren't random. They aren't sacred. They are placed by the same priesthood that rose from the ashes of Rome. Every system has a calendar. Because a calendar is not about marking time, it's about controlling rhythm. And rhythm controls ritual. And ritual controls belief. And belief controls behavior. The boy in Britain had his calendar taken from him. No more equinox fires, no more solstice rites, no more ancestral harvest feasts aligned to the sun and moon. Instead, he was given saints' days, scripture recitations, penitence, guilt, obedience. Sound familiar? You live in the same structure, only now the saints are celebrities. The liturgy is corporate, the cathedral is digital, but the rhythm remains. Clock in, scroll, consume, sleep, repeat. And the whole time, they harvest your attention, because that's what they want. Not your body, your mind, your voluntary submission, but you're breaking the rhythm now. You're hearing the old drum again, the pulse of the pre-empire man, the one who watched the stars and read the wind, the one who didn't ask permission to be sovereign. That's who's waking up in you, and once he's fully awake, the cage won't hold, the program won't run, the empire will tremble. You're almost through now. The illusions are burning off, not slowly, violently, because that's what truth does when it's been buried too long. It doesn't whisper, it erupts. You feel it in your spine. Not knowledge, but remembrance. Of a version of you that doesn't apologize for existing, that doesn't beg for identity, permission, or purpose. That version was born long before governments, before schools, before screens, and he's staring through your eyes now. Let me show you what he sees. He sees a world wrapped in symbols, most of them inverted. The eagle, once a sign of divine clarity, now stands for empire and surveillance. The cross, once a sacred intersection of spirit and earth, now used to guilt and tame. The crown, once a reflection of celestial order, now represents inherited greed. Every symbol they use has been stolen, corrupted, weaponized. Why? Because the human psyche is built on symbol. And if they own your symbols, they own you. That's why the boy in post-Roman Britain lost more than his language. He lost his mental architecture, his meaning-making system, his inner compass, and they replaced it with doctrines, with dogma, with fear dressed as salvation. And they've done the same to you. But here's what they never predicted, that men would rise who could trace the theft, who could feel the fracture, who could pick up the broken symbol